In this edition of Behind the Disney Classics, we will be focusing on the 31st animated feature film from the Walt Disney Animation Classics canon. A troubled production which would go on to become one of the most successful traditionally animated films of all time and would revolutionize the medium going forward. Released in 1992 at the height of the Disney Renaissance, it is of course Aladdin. In the late 1980s, the Disney studio was hard at work developing The Little Mermaid, a film which would go on to become one of the most successful Disney animations of all time, ushering in a period known as the Disney Renaissance, and marking the end of over a decade of unsuccessful output from the studio. One of the things that made Little Mermaid so spectacular was its bright, energetic, and catchy music, making it the first Disney feature to use Broadway-inspired musical numbers and setting a template for the films that would follow. The men behind the music of The Little Mermaid were two songwriters who had in fact seen success on Broadway with their musical adaptation of Little Shop of Horrors. They were of course lyricist Howard Ashman and composer Alan Menken, two of the most prolific and acclaimed songwriters in the Disney canon. Before Mermaid had the chance to prove its success, or rather had even finished production, Ashman and Menken had begun work on their next project, one unsolicited by the studio and spurred on by Ashman's own interest in the Middle Eastern folktales of the Arabian Nights. Depending on the retelling, Ashman and Menken wrote 6 to 8 songs and a 40 to 50 page treatment based on the story of Aladdin and the Magic Lamp from the 1001 Nights, and pitched it to the then head of Disney Animation, Jeffrey Katzenberg. Katzenberg liked the idea and allowed the film to go into conceptual production under the working title Arabian Nights. After working on the project for some time, Arabian Nights was put aside by Katzenberg, who was dismissive of the direction that Ashman and Menken were taking with the story, said to be a more literal source adaptation that had story problems. Instead of pursuing the project any further, Ashman and Menken were instead transferred onto the production of Beauty and the Beast, where they would provide the songs and score. Soon after the completion and release of Little Mermaid in 1989, the film's directors John Musker and Ron Clements were asked by Katzenberg to direct another feature for the studio. With the help of Beauty and the Beast screenwriter Linda Wolverton, Musker and Clements re-envisioned the story of Arabian Nights as Aladdin. They dumped the film's more literal translation and infused it with a more high-adventure fantasy vibe, pulling inspiration from the 1940 British adventure film The Thief of Bagdad. From Thief, the filmmakers took the characters of the Sultan, Jafar, the evil vizier, and the thief's friend Sabu, reimagining him as Aladdin's pet monkey Abu. They would also use some of the film's fantastical elements such as the magic flying carpet, and would move the setting from China to Baghdad. Wolverton, Musker and Clements chose to use only a handful of Ashman and Menken's original songs, but worked closely with the songwriting team to produce new pieces. Ill at the time, Ashman was only able to complete 2 new songs, including Prince Ali, before passing away in March of 1991. 1 month later, after working an entire year on pre-production, having written a screenplay draft and produced an enormous story reel of the entire feature, Clements and Musker screened the proposed film to Katzenberg on a day that would go down in Disney animation history as Black Friday. Katzenberg is said to have hated the story reel, feeling that absolutely nothing in the movie was working, and motioned that it be entirely reworked and rewritten from scratch, demanding that its set release date of November 1992 would not be budged. The filmmakers now had only 19 months to pull together a feature that would usually take 3 to 4 years. The filmmakers and animators spent an intensive 8 days bunkered down on the Disney lot, nutting out a brand new reworking of the film and taking on Katzenberg's insistence that Ashman's visualization shouldn't be depended upon. At the end of the 8 days, the newly storyboarded version of the film was pitched to Katzenberg, who following the presentation, looked at Musker and Clements and said in a typically dry way, "Fine, we'll go with that." Very soon after, screenwriters Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who would later go on to write the first 4 Pirates of the Caribbean films for Disney, were brought onto the project to rapidly write a screenplay. Elliott and Rossio would take Wolverton's screenplay with all its inspiration from Thief of Bagdad, but transform it into what animator Eric Goldberg would describe as Disney's first buddy comedy. They would change the setting from Baghdad to the fictional country of Agrabah, and further reconceptualize Ashman's elements of the film, chopping out many of his songs. While 3 of Ashman's songs, Prince Ali, Arabian Nights, and Friend Like Me, would be retained in this final version, lyricist Tim Rice would work with Menken to write A Whole New World, One Jump Ahead, and the reprise of Prince Ali. Another of Katzenberg's requests would see a complete redesign of the character of Aladdin. Presented as an incredibly young, plain looking down on his luck everyman in the original treatments, Katzenberg found it unbelievable that Aladdin would have any chance at getting together with the gorgeous and exotic Princess Jasmine. He likened it to being like Michael J. Fox and Julia Roberts, desiring instead to have Tom Cruise and Julia Roberts. Katzenberg tasked animator Glenn Keane with the redesign, insistent that Aladdin be depicted as a hero type. Musker and Clements felt Katzenberg's demands were taking things too far, believing Aladdin needed to remain a boyish underdog. Keane found a mid-ground between the two ideas and conceptualized Aladdin's final look, while Elliott and Rossio rewrote him as a little rougher, like a young Harrison Ford. Inspired by the curvy artwork of Al Hirschfeld, a well-known caricaturist of the New York Times and the New Yorker, Eric Goldberg was tasked with designing the character of the genie, the style of which heavily inspired many other characters in the film. Combined with an infused Middle Eastern aesthetic, Aladdin featured an art design unlike any other Disney film before it, not only in terms of the cultural influence, but also in its outlandish, often goofy and comedic style. Following Rescuers Down Under and Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin was the third feature to be produced entirely on the CAP system, which was an all-digital ink and paint animation system which allowed for digital drawing and inking. The system could also be used to create 3D animated elements, and while the previous films had utilised these functions moderately for objects and architecture, Aladdin was the first to use them to produce character animation, thus making Aladdin's magic carpet one of the first all-computer animated characters in a major motion picture. While past Disney animations had incorporated celebrity voices in their cast, such as Bing Crosby, Peggy Lee, Louis Prima, Peter Ustinov, Bob Newhart, and Ava Gabor, most voice acting was performed specifically by voice actors or character performers, and any famous names involved in a production were never used as a draw for audiences in film marketing. In casting Hollywood megastar Robin Williams in the role of the genie and heavily exploiting his role through film publicity, Disney broke ground for voice acting in animation. Not only did Williams deliver a manic, powerhouse, largely improvised performance like never before seen, adding an entirely meta element to the already kitschy film, but in doing so he opened up whole new possibilities for the medium. As a result, Disney paved the way of the future in which big Hollywood celebrities could be utilised in animated films, to deliver brand new styles of vocal acting and draw bigger audiences into the cinema. In actual fact, this was something that went against Williams' wishes, who agreed to take a cut salary of $75,000 down from his usual $8 million if his name and performance weren't used in promotions, advertising, and merchandising. Going against their genie's wish, Disney would sever their relationship with Williams for many years, but would eventually make amends. Regardless of this, following Aladdin, the use of Hollywood stars in animated films and their marketing became an increasingly popular trend. Over the next few years alone, the roster of names who lent their voices to animated characters would include James Earl Jones, Rowan Atkinson, Tom Hanks, Tim Allen, Mel Gibson, Demi Moore, Danny DeVito, Minnie Driver, Glenn Close, Billy Crystal, John Goodman, Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy, Cameron Diaz, Michael J. Fox, Emma Thompson, Dame Judi Dench, and even Robert De Niro and Paul Newman. In this day and age, it would be rather odd to see an animated feature without at least one big star attached. Aladdin would finally open in cinemas on November 25, 1992, and thanks in part to the involvement of Robin Williams and the film's proximity to both Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid, it opened to unprecedented critical and commercial acclaim. Time magazine would call Aladdin a cartoon Raiders of the Lost Ark, today's best animators excavating and restoring the medium of Walt, Tex, and Chuck are triumphant raiders of the lost art, and would say that Katzenberg and the studio's continued string of hits were reviving the American cinema's unique contribution to 20th century art. Despite opening at the box office at number 2 behind Home Alone 2, it would eventually rake in $217 million in the US and over $500 million internationally. Accumulatively, this is the equivalent of over $1.3 billion adjusted for inflation in 2019. Aladdin was not only the first animated feature to ever make over $200 million domestically at the box office, but it was the biggest film of 1992 and the highest grossing animated film of all time at the time of release. At the 1993 Academy Awards, Aladdin will be nominated for 5 Oscars, with Alan Menken winning one for Best Original Score and another for Best Original Song for A Whole New World, which he shared with Tim Rice. Menken and Ashman's Friend Like Me would also be up for nomination in the same category. At the Golden Globes, the same 2 awards were won, with Robin Williams also being accoladed with a special award for his groundbreaking and inimitable voice work. Aladdin has quite obviously gone on to be one of the most well-known and beloved animations of all time, and a true highlight of Disney's Renaissance period. It's a gorgeous love story with spectacular high fantasy, still wondrous animation, a brilliant soundtrack, and revolutionary voice work. Aladdin would quickly spawn an entire franchise, with a plethora of toys and worldwide merchandise initiatives, a pair of straight-to-home video sequels, Return of Jafar in 1994 and King of Thieves in 1996, an animated series debuting in 1994, a still iconic 1993 DOS-based video game, an almost immediate integration into Disney parks, and more recently, a world-renowned Tony Award-winning Broadway musical, and a live-action remake starring Will Smith in the role of the genie, released in 2019. Aladdin isn't a personal favourite of mine, but it's a movie that I love dearly, if not simply for Williams' unrivaled performance and what the movie meant for animation going forward. It's quite remarkable that with such a troubled beginning, Aladdin pulled through in just over a year to change the face of motion pictures. Just as its lead character, Aladdin truly is a diamond in the rough. If this is your first time viewing one of my videos, you like what you've seen, you'd like to see more like this in the future, then please don't forget to hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen right now, and also hit that like button down below if you're feeling extra generous. Also, don't forget to check out my many social media accounts, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day.